that we've been talking about as well, you've heard for the last 2 weeks, is about school choice. HB 1222 specifically. We've interviewed Ms. Laurie Lee from Arkansas Parents for School Choice last week. We also interviewed her this week. And I want to now welcome to the program Dr. Patrick Wolf is with us, and he is a professor and 21st century chair in school choice from the University of Arkansas. Dr. Wolf, welcome to the program, sir.
Happy to be here, Paul.
Hey, I'm glad that you're here because I know you have a lot of expertise on school choice. Obviously, it's in your title as you work for the University of Arkansas. And so, Dr. Wolf, what I want to know is, what are your thoughts on this bill, HB 1222, that did pass out of the House Education Committee this week? What are your thoughts?
Well, Paul, government sources spend over $12,000 a year per student in the public schools in Arkansas. And basically what this bill will do is it will offer every parent in the state the option. Obviously, they still have the option to send their kid to a traditional public school and have those resources spent on them, but the government controls the spending of those resources. And what HB 1222 would do is offer $6,700, so, almost, about half of those resources to parents in a spending account that they would control and that they could use to pay for private school tuition or textbooks or tutoring or any number of factors. So really, it's giving parents the option, more resources controlled by the government in the traditional school system, or less resources for their child, but resources they control and can use to customize their child's education.
Okay. And, that's just similar stuff that we heard before. Now, let's just talk about the naysayers. And maybe, I don't know if you've heard any of the naysayers, but a lot of them have to do with public education already, mainly superintendents who believe this is going to affect the amount of money they have to divvy up every year. That seems to be the root cause of their fear. But what have you heard, and what are they saying to some of their teachers? Because I've heard, from people who, they come to me, they're like, well, in the teachers' lounge, they were saying this, and they're in this bubble, kind of like the politicians down at the Capitol, and, whatever narrative gets started is the one that just gets parroted everywhere. So what have you heard as reasons to not do this from the public school monopoly?
Well, they say that, they're going to lose resources and that they're not going to be able to serve the kids that they currently have. But there are really three reasons why this bill would be good for traditional public schools. One is the students who participate in private school choice programs are the students who just aren't fitting in the traditional public schools. So that basically would remove from public schools the students who aren't succeeding there, making their job easier. Secondly, the local funding for these students stays in the traditional public schools. So the schools would have more money to spread around to the students who remain, and per pupil spending in the public schools would actually go up. And thirdly, these kinds of programs generate healthy institutional competition. They challenge the traditional public school monopoly, and there have been 23 studies of what happens to students who stay in public schools when choice is introduced in their community. 22 of them find there's a clear benefit for the students in terms of higher test scores. So competitive pressure really does pay off and help students, even if they don't participate in these kinds of programs.
Yeah, I think everybody out there who is, listened to this program for a long time, I think competition is the solution to so many of our problems or so many of our government missions that just kind of never seem to get any better, whether that's education or whether that's something else. It is about competition. Folks, we are talking with Dr. Patrick Wolf, again, a professor and 21st century chair in school choice from the University of Arkansas. And, Patrick, I wanted to get your comments because, as I mentioned earlier, this passed out of the House Education Committee. Brian Fanny, over at the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the headline there, Arkansas bill lets parents tailor kids' school funds. And that's the headline. And in there, we have a comment from the governor, Asa Hutchinson. And he has expressed unease with the cost of the bill. And this is odd to me, number one, because somebody who's kind of heard I don't know if it's inside baseball or just gossip. I thought the governor had come on board with this, HB 1222, and now it looks like maybe he got enough heat that he's not, because this is what he's quoted as saying, Dr. Wolf, quote, "I've always been a strong advocate for choice of parents in the educational environment." Now, folks listening at home, you're probably about to hear a but, because that's exactly what happens when you start a sentence that way in political speak. I've always been a strong advocate for freedom, but, okay, sorry. I've always been a strong advocate for for choice of parents in the educational environment, but I do have to watch over the state budget, and this would have a negative impact of approximately $7 million. Now, let's take that right there. Is that true, Dr. Wolf? Would this have a negative impact of $7 million?
Basically, the state would have to give out $6.5 million in tax credits to generate $10 million in educational spending. So basically, the state's getting $1 in education spending in support of families for every 65 cents in tax credits that it's giving out. So that's a great deal fiscally. So if you just look at the revenue loss side, it's $6.5 million, not $7 million. It's $6.5 million.
Okay.
But there are fiscal benefits as well, because students will be leaving public schools to take these education savings accounts and customize their kids' education. And those kids cost the state much more in public schools than they do for the value of these ESAs. And so based on the funding formulas, the education funding formulas, after basically a one-year lag period, the state starts reaping cost benefits from this program, the cost reduction.
I see. So when we have a per student, so each student costs X amount of dollars in the state, and so we're saying that, hey, now if this student were to use this tax credit and now go to a private school, the state now no longer is paying for that student, correct?
That's right, except the payments are based on previous year enrollment. So the first year, the state has to pay for the kid twice. Once in the public school that they're no longer attending, and then also for the ESA. But once that washes out, that's just a one-time charge. Then every year the student is using the ESA instead of being in the traditional public schools, the state reaps a benefit.
Okay. The second part of this quote from the governor is, quote, "For that reason, I've expressed my reservations on the bill. In addition," he writes, "my preference would be that if we used limited state resources for choice, it should first go to those children who are caught in an academically failed school and are looking for a way out, and low-income students." So my next question, Dr. Wolf, does the bill not prioritize low-income students? Does it not? Is it not for those kids that he's describing?
It certainly is, Paul. The beauty with this bill in its design is it has universal eligibility. Every K-12 student in the state would be eligible to participate in the program, but it prioritizes service to low-income kids, the kids who qualify for the federal lunch program.
That's strange.
Yeah.
That sounds like that's a direct contradiction of what was said in the paper, at least. But go ahead. Please continue.
Yeah, and the reality is, that those are the kids who tend to be in the public schools that really aren't serving their needs, and they are the kinds of kids who are highly motivated to participate in these private school choice programs. So I'm confident that with the launch of this program, the participants in it, especially in their early years, will be overwhelmingly low-income kids leaving low-performing public schools. It's really built into the design of the bill.
Wow. Again, we're talking with Dr. Patrick Wolf. So it sounds like, I mean, if I can predict what's happened so far in the last 8 weeks, anytime a bill gets out of a committee, just to be quite honest with you, Dr. Wolf, anytime a bill gets out of a committee that maybe some of the leadership don't want or express, hey, we don't want this to the media, it does tend to have a really hard time, and it's died. So this is a good bill from what I can tell. I've talked to other activists that have walked, they've knocked doors to get people with a certain political ideology elected into office, and it's taken decades for some of them. And some of them are wondering, hey, if we have majorities, Republican majorities, if we can't get something as simple as this passed through, a lot of people are scratching their head. So I say all that to ask you, Dr. Wolf, what should people do, if they want this to occur, if parents want more choice and where their kids can go to school or how they could use resources, to buy books or take an online class. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done here. And yeah, it's a new idea, but I guess we got to ask, are the ideas that we're using right now, are they producing the results that we want? And it's not necessarily more money that's always the answer in education. Here's an example of giving the individual that's closest to the child a way to spend that money. And let's try that idea for once, because right now we have the idea where we just give it to the government and let them try to figure it out. What are your thoughts, Dr. Wolf?
Sure, Paul. So I've studied private school choice for 20 years. I've basically made it my career to become an expert on this topic. And my home state now of Arkansas was late to the private school party. We didn't have any private school choice programs until 2 years ago, when Representative House ushered through the Succeed Scholarship Program, which is a highly targeted program for students with disabilities, very small scale. Basically, from my study, my research on private school choice, tax credit-funded ESAs, education savings accounts, which is what HB 1222 would create, are the ideal model. And universal access really means that this is a program for everyone, and every Arkansan would be in this together. So basically, Arkansas would go from being a laggard in private school choice to being the model for the nation. And given that 29 states have private school choice programs and have 52 programs, I mean, for Arkansas to really leap ahead and be sort of, the shining star on the hill for the rest of the country, I think would be a great achievement for our state, and something that would help our students and our families tremendously in terms of improving the educational outcomes of children.
Dr. Patrick Wolf, I appreciate you coming on the program. I hope we can do it soon. Do it again very soon. And if you hear anything or we have any more information we need to get out to the listeners, I would just encourage folks to call your legislators, tell them you want more choice, not less, more freedom, not less. Dr. Patrick Wolf, we appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, Paul.
All righty.